incontestable is across the world one does have major religious groups that clearly are religions, whether it's Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Sikhism, Hinduism, etc. And it is whether those religions within themselves manifest, as I think they clearly do, examples of goodness and badness and how those are to be found. I think the challenge of the new atheists that religion has been responsible for much evil and suffering is a point that is well made. I think the mistake they make is to move from that statement that there are examples of manifestations of religion that are bad to say all religion is bad. And I think that's simplistic. I think that religionists respond to the new atheist challenge by feeling they must defend religion at all costs, whatever its manifestation. And I think we need more sophistication. We need to differentiate between bad religion, which should be opposed by atheists and by religious believers together, and good religion, which I would hope would be admired by atheists and also supported by religionists. So I think the differentiation shouldn't actually be between atheists and believers, although there clearly is a differentiation there, but between both atheists and believers who are opposing manifestations of bad religion which are corrupting, damaging to the human spirit, dehumanizing, and not faithful to the religions they claim to represent. And I think there's an enormous amount of damage being done in the world by religion being used as a tool, and it is up to the followers of religion to stand up against bad religion in their own ranks, and it's not happening enough. Well, let's use the example of Islam, where, particularly in Australia, the focus is on publicity associating Islam with what I would regard as bad religion, with fundamentalism and terrorism. It's actually completely counter to the spirit of Islam, it's counter to the Amman Declaration, it's counter to what most religionists believe. But the publicity focus is on a very small minority. But I think the same applies in Christianity. I think there's an awful lot of bad Christianity about. Think of the burning of witches, think of the Crusades. There are uses of Christianity today which are deplorable. The same applies to the other religions as well. So I think the publicity tends to be on a fairly small, narrow band, but it is presented in a way that is actually giving the impression that it is much more prevalent. Religion gets tarred with the brush of bad religion very easily. One of the things we do in my own country, in Britain, where religious and values education is mandatory in a way it isn't in this country, in our schools. But it's an academic subject, and we would therefore expect young people to be exposed from an early age to Islam, to understand Islam. One of the weaknesses in Australian education is that you don't actually help people to think through religious issues. Now, like it or not, across the world, religion is enormously important. You've got Australian troops fighting in areas where religion is taken very seriously indeed. And you're getting a whole generation growing up who know almost nothing about Christianity, let alone about Islam. I think part of good education should be helping young people to understand the essentials of what religion is about, and that isn't happening in Australian schools. Now, obviously there are independent schools which take their own traditions seriously, but there's a lack of intellectual rigour and a lack of engagement with these issues, which I think is a great pity. Now, in my own country, in England, the fastest growing subject area in the last 15 years has actually been religious studies, and that's an academic approach. It's not indoctrination, it's helping people to think deeply and well, using philosophy, using rational reflection on central issues across all the religious traditions. And I think that approach is deeply humanising, and it's part of what good education should be about, and it's missing in Australia. I think if we try to focus on the issue that brought us together, which is good and bad religion, I'm not actually sure how much the issue of truth is going to help us. And that's controversial, and there's a sense in which I'm unhappy to say it, because truth, I think, is of huge importance. And I don't actually think there is a way of independently establishing the truth of one religion rather than another. Within each religion, there may be justification for truth claims, but the justification of Jesus rising from the dead, the justification of Judaism, the justification of Islam and the status of the Quran, I don't think that's independently verifiable, so I don't think that's going to be a helpful criteria. But I do think there are criteria that can be helpful. Now, I would start with the idea of justice. I think that any religion that is not taking justice extremely seriously, both at a local level and an international level, needs to be understood as a bad religion. All the major religions take justice incredibly seriously. It's one of the most important planks in Islam. If you had to pick out one single facet in Islam that was more important than any other, apart from the submission to God, it is the idea of justice. And any religion that is not practicing justice is, in my view, a bad religion. I think humility is important. The possibility of being in error, the possibility of being wrong, however much one may be staking one's life on one's own religious convictions, to actually impose that view on others, I think is a mark of bad religion. I think that leads to intolerance, and I don't think most of the great religions are intolerant. They should be willing to be humble, to accept the possibility they could be wrong, whilst of course being willing to stake one's life on the view that one is right. One is staking one's life on one's religious claims. But that is not the same as imposing it on others. That also has implications for education. I think good education should be helping people to think deeply about their own religious tradition. I would expect a Catholic school to be taking very seriously the Catholic dimension, but also being willing to expose people to criticisms and to be exposing them to other world religious dimensions. Sadly, in some Muslim countries, that isn't done in the case of exposing people to Christianity, Judaism and Hinduism, and I think that's a weakness. I think good education should be exposing people to these. I think recognizing the freedom of individuals to make their own decisions is vital. Now, what I haven't said is that there are going to be some ethical codes that are going to differentiate good and bad religion. I think one can have a deep-seated commitment to the idea that good religion is fostering the development of human beings to fulfill their full potential. But that can be done in different ways. In some societies, a man may have one wife. In some societies, a man may have four. That doesn't necessarily make one religion bad or one good. So I don't think one can say there is a single ethical code that is a mark of a good religion and any other ethical code is a mark of a bad religion. I think human flourishing and whether religions contribute to human flourishing is one of the central ways of demarcating good and bad religion. But I would like to ground that in the philosophy of Aristotle and also Confucius, and to say that religion helps us on a journey to become fully human, what we are capable of being at our best. And I think all major religions try to do that. It's a journey towards fulfilling human nature, and I think every religion would accept that. I think one way one can differentiate between good and bad religion goes back to Aristotle, but not only Aristotle, people like Confucius as well. And that is the idea that we are all human beings. We share a common human potentiality. Now, religion at its best should be helping us to fulfill our human potential. Aristotle was the first Western scientist. He tried to understand things by understanding their nature. A good wombat fulfills the nature of a wombat and does what a wombat is meant to do. A good seagull fulfills the nature of a seagull. So what is it to fulfill human potential? That was an Aristotelian question, and I think it's a question for us today. It's a question that should concern psychiatry, psychology, anthropology, sociology. Good religions should help human beings to fulfill their potential at their best. People like Nelson Mandela, people like Desmond Tutu are examples of human beings that are in many ways fulfilling the potential of human beings. And I think what is needed for followers of religion to stand up against bad practices of their own religion. I think the discussion about good and bad religion is not about which religions are good and which are bad. It's about Muslims standing up against bad use of Islam, Christians standing up against bad use of Christianity. But what is needed is members of a religion to stand against their own co-religionists. And that's uncomfortable, because it means a faithful Catholic standing up against things that are not faithful to what Catholicism should really be about. And that applies across all the religious groups. It takes a lot of courage to stand up against your enemies. It actually takes more courage to stand up against your so-called friends. So I think there is a real need for people to stand up within their own religious traditions against manifestations of religion that are corrupting and debasing.